Thank you once again, E, for the NXT report. And just to answer your question, I got a hard out, bottom of the hour. And as soon as you're done with me, you can uh, listen to Fonzie. Yeah, absolutely, E. So all of your brass ring media favorites coming at you in a short amount of time. Instead of just promoting the show after me, why don't I promote myself? I am Rob. This is the Nocturnal Knockout, a brass ring media podcast. What's going on, brass ring media faithful? How's it going, YouTube? Are you guys ready for this weekend? Are you guys set? There's so much wrestling to watch this weekend. As the show goes on, and again, we've got about an hour, I need to know your plans. I'm not going to stalk you guys or anything. I'm not coming after you. I'm not data tracking you guys. We've already got all that information. We don't need none of that. But I want to know what your plans are for the weekend of wrestling. Are you staying in all weekend? Are you watching everything? Are you going to watch the NXT show right when you're done with All In, right before main event? I don't know if you can squeeze that in. Are you going to save that till the next day to watch Evolution on that day? Are you watching any wrestling this weekend? Are you taking a wrestling cleanse? Are you boycotting any events? Is there something you're not going to check out? Is anyone not watching Saturday night's main event? Is anyone not watching the Great American Bash? Is anyone not watching Evolution? Is anyone not watching All In? I think those are all very, very much on the table. There's so many wrestling options this weekend, so many things to talk about. Next week's show, we'll have tons of results to break down, maybe different landscapes in wrestling. Who knows? But for this week, what I decided that we are going to do for the majority of the short time that we have together this week is I think we're going to spend a little bit of time in AEW land for a change. Normally, we talk a lot about WWE on this show, and it seems to be sort of the vibe of the show. We break down a lot of stuff WWE related. I'll be honest with you, I started watching AEW for a while, not really as a big protest against the company, just out of some kind of convenience. And it took me a little while to get attached back on there. That's why I hadn't always discussed it on this show. I've been back on AEW for a little while, just like a lot of the audience has come back after the bleeding that happened over the last couple of years. And they are the focus, I would say, this week in wrestling. And they have had one of the more notable wrestling programs and storyline arcs that we've had in all of wrestling over the past few months. Really the shining star in what has been kind of a doldrums period. Let's get in on some of your early chats here before we get into everything that we're talking about. He's asking if I'm doing the post show for pay-per-view views this weekend. I will not be doing that. I don't know if anyone else will. If anyone else on like the brass ring team wants to take over the pay-per-view post shows, I haven't been able to do them for a while. That lane is open for you guys. Hint, hint. Boss is going to a Creed concert on Saturday, which is amazing. And then going to Myrtle Beach on Sunday. I'm going to a Creed concert in August, so I ain't going to talk smack about you going to your Creed show. I'm going to go see Creed in August, because summer of '99 forever, people. Fernando says WWE set up Evolution to fail this weekend. Let's be honest. I don't know if they set it up to fail. They just didn't really set it up much. I'm looking at this card. It's like a really, really good card that Evolution ended up with. Now, quiz me on how they got to all these matches, and I can't tell you anything. I got no clue how they got to half of these really, really good matches, really, really intriguing matches. They just kind of really didn't build the card. It is weird. Fernando says also he's been with AEW through thick and thin. Good for you, Fernando. And I feel like for someone like you, this weekend probably has to have a nice little payoff to it. You're going to get rewarded for the time that you put in. And E notes that Ash is doing an all-in watch line. Is she doing that on her channel, E, or is on the Brass Ring channel? I might have to check that out. I'm gonna have that kind of going in the ear a little bit, especially if some of you guys are going to be in there. So I got to feel what you guys are seeing so I can know what we're going to talk about next week. What I'm talking about this week, as I mentioned, and as you can see in the thumbnail, is we're going to talk about some coronations and maybe some of the things that we can learn from some of these coronations of the past. Now, when I say coronations, what do you guys normally think of? Like, I want to know what matches, moments, times do you normally think of as a big coronation or culmination? Really, almost you can say it's a bit of a season finale. You can say it's just the wrap up of some bigger storylines. I want you to start thinking about, traditionally in wrestling, some big time coronations. What went well with them? What didn't go well with them? And maybe what I'm going to focus on is what can AEW kind of learn, take away, do similarly, do different. Fernando says WWE booked Evolution on the same weekend as All In, Saturday's main event. Great American Bash. The Beyonce concert. Evolution never stood a chance. Yeah, the Beyonce concert alone's got to knock that out. He's got his big culmination is the Great Khali winning the title from Cena. I mean, who could forget? That was basically Hulk and Andre, but for the modern era. Speaking of, much less ironic, Azan notes, Hulk in December/January 83 to 84 is getting the title initially. Oh, and Jinder Mahal being the WWE. Yeah, that was probably, I would say Jinder and Orton is like I don't know who's Hogan's other rival. I mean, like Heaton or Bundy. Mark said he knew about the Beyonce concert prior to WWE Evolution, and I don't even really listen to her like that. Hey, Beyonce's a huge star. What are we saying? There's a good one. Azan. The Rock winning SummerSlam '98. That is a really good one. And you guys have some really good ones. I did not, on what we're gonna say, I did not include any of those because admittedly this is gonna be an incomplete list with the time constraints and some of the things I wanted to hit on. I wanted to hit on some very, very specific things. Beyonce is not quite Mark's thing. Set that Mania and Money in the Bank. That's another combination. What chance do I give Goldberg? Like 0.5%. I do not, Mark. I do not have a guest star on tonight. It's just me. Fonzie's coming on after me though, so you have an actual star in Fonzie. DX versus Umaga, Shane and Vince. Yeah, I give Goldberg 0 chance. Goldberg is not winning that match. If that's the case, we have a whole hell of a lot to talk about next. Talk about scrapping a format. We gotta do a whole new thing. If Goldberg has the big gold belt come next Wednesday, we've got a lot of issues we're gonna have to address if that is the case. Oh yeah, sorry about that, Mark. This is on RVD's Twitter, so you do see that. I do hope you do stick around. This is more wrestling talk. Sometimes we have a guest on or another speaker, but generally we don't have, or never have other wrestlers. But if you want to hang around and just talk wrestling, chat about things, go a little off topic, that's kind of what we do here. Oh, Derek's got one. Derek's got Randy Savage winning the title at WrestleMania 4, Ultimate Warrior WrestleMania 6, HBK WrestleMania 12, Stone Cold at WrestleMania 14 as examples for coronations. RVD is awesome, what Fernando said. RVD has kind of a cool coronation of his own if you think about the one night stand coronation. That's a pretty awesome one. RVD's got a lot going on. He's got twins on the way. He's got all those business opportunities, a lot going on. Our guy Rob, good for him. And thanks for sharing the Twitter account, Rob. Okay. I want to kind of set the stage here a little bit. Like I said, for the first time in about 3 years, AEW has some sustained positive momentum. At a time when WWE, quite honestly, feels a little bit bloated, AEW has offered, believe it or not, a sleek alternative to WWE. And AEW has always functioned at its best when it's not necessarily the other WWE program, but it has its own identity. And there's a lot of other factors to play into why it's the case that AEW has their little bit of an upswing of momentum. But I'd say, like most wrestling promotions, the indicator of that health and the thing that makes people feel good is when you have really good top storylines that people feel highly invested in. Now, obviously, you do have to make some money. You got to get the ratings. You gotta attendance, all of that stuff. And that stuff is up slightly with AEW, but not to the point that they were back in their founding to like 2022. But right now we're in a pretty cool spot where AEW fans have seemingly had just about all that they can have of the Jon Moxley title run. They were much more over it when he was feuding with Edge than he is right now, but make no mistake about it, they are definitely over it. I meant to say cope. I am sorry. He's a heel champion who's getting booed, and people want the babyface who, while this would not be his first run at the top. He's as much of like a homegrown kind of guy, as much of an AEW guy as you can get, and getting pure babyface reactions, no ambiguity. Whenever wrestling companies hit this spot, they're usually in a pretty good spot. And every few years in wrestling, it just feels like you have this sort of match of the century, match of the company, where the main event match feels like the most important thing in the company and in all of wrestling. And as you know, I've been noting here, it's anchored by this top feud. And for as like jaded as wrestling fans can become, all wrestling fans really want is like to be told a good story, preferably with people that they don't hate telling that story. And I think history has very much shown that whenever you deliver those simple elements, people come. As I said, believe it or not, wrestling fans, they do like wrestling. And they do like the basics of wrestling. It may not seem like it. Everyone's on a computer and a phone all day long, giving their takes about how everything sucks and everything they could do better and yada, yada, yada. But nevertheless, people want that coherent storytelling. I think that's where some of the criticism comes from, is that you spend so much time watching a form of entertainment that doesn't even always follow the guidelines of entertainment and being satisfied. But every now and then it does. And as Fernando is mentioning, it's not just this feud, and that should be pointed out. Let me highlight that in the chat. As he has Mercedes versus Timeless Tony feels bigger than Moxley versus Heyman. You also have a pretty well-built Omega Okada match in 2025 on that card. That card's a very, very good card, top to bottom. You have the Bucks match with Swerve and Ospreay and the EVP titles on the line. There's tons of going on to have all this feel like this positive momentum that's headed into this show. The show that, quite frankly, they are billing as their WrestleMania. You've got a Super Card of Honor happening before it. This is their biggest show of the year, and this time it's not happening in London, so it doesn't even have that like sheen of this special novelty because of it being over there. You also are very unlikely for CM Punk to like ruin the whole company at the start of this show. I'm not saying it won't happen, but the likelihood of it happening is a little bit lower. I want to, though, look back at some of the past coronations that have happened or been attempted. Now, for this list, I'm mostly going to stick to events where the title was actually awarded. I wouldn't talk to a coronation, say, was it like Wrestle Kingdom in 2018 when everyone thought Naito was getting the belt, and he didn't. WrestleMania 39 where they played with fire with Cody Rhodes. I'm not gonna really take one of those into account because those are a completely different thing. Those are like when coronations are missed. I don't know about you guys. Does anyone at all? And if you do, speak now. Put it in the chat so it could be on record forever. Does anyone think that Jon Moxley will still have the belt on Monday, on Tuesday? I agree. I think it worked out for them, Fernando, but I think they played with fire, and I figured you would know that. You'd be the expert on that. You really would. You really would. So let's take a look at some past coronations, and let's see what lessons can kind of be learned from some of these coronations. Some were really good, and some had some rough times. I'm sorry for you guys are getting the glare of this really bright thing that's shining right here. So you know me, I like to put up a good slideshow to take us through where we're going. It also makes me smaller. I don't know how much you like seeing like my big old face just like super on there. It's probably not good video. My crappy slides that I made, much better video. Much better video. So we're gonna anchor our discussion in the more modern-ish era. By modern-ish era, I'm saying about 28 years ago for our first reference on this list. I guess I could have put up the this slide over here. So, hey, some of your guys' predictions are coming in. E says Mox wins, but eventually loses to Lashley. Derek saying that Derek doesn't have much faith in their booking, so I can't say for certain that Mox won't retain. We talked last week about scar tissue. I think Derek, and I'm not saying this to be critical, I think that's very, very fair. There's a little bit of scar tissue on some of these finishes that AEW has had and some of their booking over the years. They've earned that. And Maria just says Moxley needs to lose. I agree. I think Moxley is actually a really good heel champion. I think to the extent that people hate him, it's kind of working in a heel way, and he has people interested in the babyface. And I think, and to give him his flowers on that, I think regardless who the choice would have been, say the choice would have been Ospreay, I think it could have been built very similar. I think Hangman's the better choice, but the fact that Moxley was the way he was as a heel, I think it really helps the babyface greatly, which is always a key in these. Maria says she thinks AEW will lose fans if Moxley wins. Yeah, I agree. It would be one of those WCW type of what the hell kind of finishes, and now we're going on. With this. Azan says it comes down to the other match of the show because the undercard affect the main event and who gets involved. Now, a lot of people, before we get into the finishes, a lot of people have been predicting the WrestleMania 40 Avengers Endgame ending to this, which probably makes sense. All the sins from the past are going to come back, get undone. I don't know. Seth Rollins is going to take like a million moves. If Seth Rollins comes out there and also like ruins Jon Moxley's title run to give to Adam Page, he might be like the greatest mercenary ever. But I don't think that that's going to happen. But if you know that's what's going to happen, what's the strategy from a kayfabe standpoint? Do you have to like get more guys booked to come out there at the right time? I was trying to figure this out a couple weeks ago, actually, with our producer over here about the main event of WrestleMania 40. Like the way to win is to make sure you calculate more guys to come out, but you have to time them just right. And you have to have the exact right number. So like in that match of WrestleMania 40, the Undertaker was like the tiebreaker, I guess. And you got to time when the guys come out because you can't ever have two guys come out at once. It's got to be very orderly in the lane of interferences. Mox has 7. So if you just get 8 guys, you win, right? That's how the math works. I think that's all the strategy that the hanger needs there. And he's a smart guy, he's a former teacher. I think the hanger just needs to count. All right. So the first one I'm going to talk about, as I mentioned, comes from 28 years ago. Starrcade 97. Hogan versus Sting. Neither made sense, Ladia. To that point, neither made sense. There's no real connection for either guy. Neither made sense. Austin only just makes more sense in the fact that it's cooler than if it would have been Undertaker in his workout gear, but neither really would have made sense. When I think of bad coronations just going poorly or what not to do, I think Starrcade 97 has to be like the top tier. That's S tier in coronations gone wrong. You think about everything that WCW could have had going for them in this time period. Like, this is right in the wake of Montreal, where they've just snagged the hottest free agent in wrestling who leaves the other company under controversial circumstances. It's right before Tyson comes in. The Austin thing hasn't quite bubbled. WWF at the time is still like in a very, very vulnerable position. But good God, did WCW really WCW it in Starrcade 97. I'm sure you guys know the specifics of what happened. You have this match. What's up, Pink TV? You have this match go down, which, if anybody has ever actually watched this match and not talked about the finish, my favorite part about it is that Hogan is squashing Sting the entire time. Now, you got to remember, you talk about coronations and build. Nothing, and I mean nothing, had really ever been built like Sting and Hogan in 97. Over a year, they take Sting off the road. He's just in the rafters. He's ambiguous on which side he is. He's the ultimate hero. Changes his whole personality. Paints himself up. Starts watching The Crow a whole bunch. Goes to Hot Topic. I mean, he's having himself a 1996, 1997 for sure. And he's the ultimate guy to do it. You look at those reactions that he got with the Nitro. I think it's in Macon, Georgia, right before this, when they sort of teased him out with him coming out and all that. The fans, society, everybody was ready for Sting to take the belt off the hated Hogan in the NWO. And my God, this thing's a squash for the actual match portion of it. It's nothing but a squash. You mentioned Bret Hart. This was the debut of Bret Hart in WCW. He was a special guest referee earlier in the night. And I get it. There may have been some issues with actually getting him on the card as a wrestler, but talk about a way to fumble like the hottest wrestler and storyline and entity in wrestling at the time. And then you get to the cover, which you have the fast count that wasn't a fast count, the restart, all of that. Sting just looked absolutely awful getting the title back. They undid it very shortly after, and it was all for naught. The company, you can argue, never, ever really recovered. I didn't include Goldberg's title win in 98 as like one of these culminations and coronations, but definitely would qualify as that. And it's one of the great ones ever. But it turned into being the last gasp that WCW had of something good, because they screwed this up so bad on such an epic scale. All things considered, I think Sting kind of comes out looking the best-ish out of all this, but talk about a situation where nobody looks good. Nobody looks great. I give Eric Bischoff credit, though. At least the guy went in there and to this day will defend his friend Hogan to no end. Like, you got to get you a friend like Eric Bischoff is a friend to Hogan. Now, might be because Hogan's very valuable to him. Not exactly selling a lot of tickets to a Real American Freestyle at the day, brother, but, you know, there's some loyalty there. And I guess you can argue Bischoff does try to cover up for Sting a little bit. But shout out to Bischoff for kind of taking the heat on this when it wasn't entirely his fault, as Fernando is saying. So he'll shift the blame to Sting in the famous line that he told Conrad Thompson a few years ago. At least Sting could have got a tan, or should have got a tan. Now, we know what he's implying there, that Sting was not in a good place, did not seem to be of championship caliber to carry the company at the time, was having some personal issues. They hadn't seen him in a while. And, you know, apparently they took one look at him and he was not the guy to be carrying the company forward. How you somehow had no contact with him before this, even though he was off the road and all that, I don't know. And how you then let Hogan talk you into everything, I don't know, because it's Hogan. But you have apparently Sting in bad shape. You have Hogan doing one of his great political jobs of all time. It's up there. It's up there with WrestleMania 9. I wish that might be a nice comparison to do on a Midsummer Day one time. What was worse for the respective companies, WrestleMania 9's finish or the finish of Starrcade 97? It's always going to be Starrcade 97, though. One of the worst results to a bad finish, bad execution of a coronation, when you could argue kind of sunk the company. And the lessons we learned here are twofold. Do not go into business with Hogan and Bischoff. This ends up being the result. Now, I don't think Tony Khan is at risk of going into business with a Hogan and Bischoff this weekend. But just in case you're thinking about it, Tony, I know you were as big a fan of this as anyone else. Do not do it. And the second thing, and this is going to come back on the last one we're going to talk about. You need to put over the babyface that you are putting over, like actually put them over. Even without all the controversy and the politicking and everything that happened and the fallout, you just watch that completely out of context. There's nothing that gets you to root for Sting for watching that. There's nothing heroic about Sting. Sting is the benefactor of Bret Hart saying, we're not going to have this happen twice. I mean, that's all that happened. They made Sting look bad. The execution was terrible and they ended up not putting him over in any meaningful way. So what kind of hero is he supposed to be later on? So I had to like do hip hop and join the Wolfpack. Like, was this why? So don't do Starrcade 97. Don't give in to Hogan and Bischoff. And for the love of God, don't make some kind of convoluted finish. Just end the damn thing. Fernando says creative control is a cancer for wrestling. Don't know if Mercedes Moné has it, but certainly is a topic of discussion lately, isn't it? Maria said nothing can be worse than WrestleMania 9. I don't know. There's some like really bad things maybe in society that can be worse, but not much is worse than WrestleMania 9. Not much. Azan said WCW didn't really put effort on Sting anyway. They took the belt off him right away. Well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, and I think that ended up being a good cover to do that, right? Like that was the whole thing is they ended up having the belt being tied up and all that immediately. So all of this was so meaningless. Meaningless in terms of like the match, meaningful on the extreme impact that it ended up having on the company. A few months down the road, though, I think we got one of the great coronations ever at WrestleMania 14. Austin and HBK with Mike Tyson as the special guest referee. Now, I've written in there, God bless America, because we just had to shout out the DX band. That might be the best part about WrestleMania 14. There's a lot of good matches. Ken and Undertaker's pretty good. The cruiser rates were awesome, but maybe the DX band, maybe the best piece of like musical instrumentation and performance I've ever experienced is the DX band at WrestleMania 14. But you look at this match that I'm talking about here, HBK and Austin, really a changing of the guard in the most, we'll talk about in a second, Nazan, the most literal sense, a changing of the guard, like where the whole company flipped from style, tone, everything. It was already headed that way. And again, yeah, Attitude probably begins in 97, but the real sort of coronation, culmination happens with this one right here. And actually ushers in an entire wrestling boom period. If like Starrcade 97 killed WCW, this was very helpful. Steve Austin, though, over the years has gone on and on about how disappointed he was in this match. And I've never quite agreed with him. It's hardly a 5-star classic, but I think Austin's disappointment in this match speaks to a couple of things. It speaks to his perfectionism, which is probably the trait that made him one of the greatest to ever do what he does. And it also speaks to probably how difficult it was to work with Shawn Michaels in the 90s. Let's be honest. That's why I think Austin probably doesn't have the fondest memories, if he has any memories. You know how Austin is with his memories. There's some stuff he has like crystal clear memory of, and then he'll claim stuff that happened in 05, happened in 97, and he doesn't remember it at all. Chair shots to the head and Budweiser's, guys. Interesting combination. I always find this really, really like curious too. When I think about this WrestleMania being the changing of the guard and everything that happened, think about the summer and the fall and all the bickering and positioning back and forth and all the little petty BS between Shawn and Bret and Vince and who was going to be on top and who got credit. I always love that literally the night after this, which is only a few months later, none of that's relevant. Bret, Shawn, those are dinosaurs from the past by the time we get here. And that's why I think this is a coordination that really has some staying power to it. HBK was injured, and I think that probably accounted for the match not being a total classic, which I think the match is not bad. I think the match is fine. And again, it didn't really matter because the crowd was super into it. The crowd wanted him to win, and the crowd got really, really into Mike Tyson being on his side. A little bit deceiving, this match always is, though. I kind of feel like, so I remember this being built, but I was like 9, so I don't know if this is like memory kind of betraying me a little bit. I want to say it kind of gave off the implication that like Tyson was boxing or wrestling in this thing too, that helped sell it just a little bit. But either way, even Tyson being there helped lend the credibility to Austin. It was very quick. It wasn't focused on. They didn't like have 6 months of Tyson beating Sean the next week and then beating all your guys and then not being as good and realizing that he was only good in this short little span. I'm not winking or hinting at anyone, but you want to put your own pieces together in that puzzle, you can. So the lesson learned here is that the result, it's the most important part, not necessarily all the details of the match. The other is, don't always give in to Sean. Don't give in to political pressures. As we're talking about there, Undertaker taping up his wrist backstage to ensure, I guess, that Sean did the job, I guess, did business the right way, as they say. I love that, Austin claims he has no memory. Sean says that's not true. Undertaker and Cornette, though, the two who have spoken about it the most, they will not in any way deny that Undertaker was hanging around as enforcement. Which I want to know, though, this has always been my thing. What does that look like if it goes bad? Like if he's, he's out there, he's kicking out on twos or he's doing something, or does Taker just go out there and shoot on him? Like, and what is that? What is like 1998 Taker shooting on 1998 Shawn Michaels on pay-per-view look like? I want to see that. I really do. Oh, 100%. Yeah, and Derek, I think you hit the nail on the head. Match wasn't going to be a classic, but it's a credible match. I think that's the way to describe it. And I think people have taken, like, I feel like when I was a kid, this match would come up in a lot of videos, a lot of comments. People had pretty good things to say about it. And I think as Austin has been given his platform and he's talked down on this match, I think people have adopted that take that it wasn't a good match. And Fernando has something that's spot on. Thank God HBK had to retire for 4 years. He would have convinced Vince to put it back on. Yeah, he would have. And like they took the belt off of Austin fairly quickly, I think. But yeah, like the next month it would have been back off him, or something, or it would never would have came off, or he would have lost his smile. I don't know. Sean at least seems to be in somewhat of a better place, unless you ask E. E does not think Sean's in a better place. And Maria said Taker would have whooped his tail. Yeah, I mean that's how the result of that would have come out. What if like Sean was? It's no. What does Cornette say? Sean is 0 for life in like real fights. Yeah, it was Undertaker, Kane, and Austin every month in '98 and '99 too. Well, more Undertaker. So I'm gonna say, and you guys can disagree with me. I'm gonna say that Austin was the only coronation really of the Attitude Era. Whoa, super blind. I don't think Rock, as we talked about before, was ever really coronated in that same kind of way. Triple H had some kind of heel coronations and some things that didn't really work out. And even you could argue Brock never really had a big coronation. I think WrestleMania 19 was kind of supposed to be his coronation, but he'd already been the champion before. And that's not a, sorry, my camera's all messed up. That's not a prerequisite, obviously. But I think that the way the match all goes down, it doesn't quite get remembered as the same kind of coronation. Maybe it's something that Angle gets a little bit more credit for. I think with The Rock, Triple H kind of took the coronation from him, and they never really had it, and they always had to use Austin to have it, and having it at Backlash. Triple H at WrestleMania 18, I think he wanted that to be his coronation, but it didn't quite pull off. Plus, he was already a multi-time champion at that point. Triple H at WrestleMania 18, though, if there's a lesson to be learned from that, it's that don't put a coronation on a show where something else much bigger is happening. That's the lesson to be learned from that one for sure. All right, we got a few minutes. We got a lot to get to, so I'm going to go through some of these quickly. Now, fast forward all the way to the Ruthless Aggression era, if you will, to 2005, Triple H versus Batista. as I've said in the past, and I will always say this is the last great storyline till the bloodline. Like the last great organic storyline that wasn't some sort of, as you're putting in the chat, I think Daniel Bryan was a very good coronation that they did. Very cool moment that they had at WrestleMania 30. But even that had to come with so much resistance and other things that it's organic in the fact that the fans wanted it, but not really organic at all to the storytelling. And you might argue that Triple H versus Batista was not necessarily organic to the storytelling. I think it was just a change in plans that really, really worked out well. Like I'll never, ever, ever, ever believe that Batista versus Triple H was like the long-term plan for WrestleMania 21. I don't even know if like at that point they really saw Batista as like this flag bearer for the company in the way that they did. I'm sure they did because of his size and like, you know, his charisma, his charisma was big back then, kind of tailed off a little bit after a while, but we've seen that he's in movies, extremely, extremely talented guy. Yeah, I don't disagree with what you guys are saying about like the Daniel Bryan stuff being like this organic groundswell, but I don't think it was necessarily this big time journey. I think it was very much this forced upon thing. No, I don't think so. Kofi Mania was a good one, although I would say the build on that was a little bit short though. That was sandwiched into something because someone else got hurt and not necessarily like a big culminating storyline. That was a good one though. That whole night is like night of culmination. I'm going to talk about something else from that night here in a little bit. And with this match at WrestleMania 21, I think it's kind of similar to WrestleMania 14. The match itself is nothing special. And I would say there are two other matches, the Backlash match and the Hell in a Cell match, are actually a little bit better. And they actually gained a little bit of chemistry with each other as they went through those matches. Nothing really wrong with Triple H and Batista, but it's a very, very basic match that Triple H bleeds in for no real discernible reason other than just to add a visual to it. But it was the right guy at the right time with the right amount of build. And it really, really went well. So the lesson that can be learned from this is that simple storytelling works amazing. It actually works really, really good. As long as people are into the babyface and don't really care for the heel. And it was kind of a perfect storm of that. Is we're in deep, deep reign of terror era by this point. Because like even Benoit and Orton couldn't save us from that. The other thing that I think can be learned from this, and I think AEW maybe has done a little bit of this, is that it's okay to pivot as long as you don't pivot too late. Like, I think they made a pivot at some point. Probably at New Year's Revolution. That's when they signaled it. But unfortunately, what they did to Randy, they ended up paying the price for that. Yeah, Cena versus JBL is on the same exact night. You could argue that's a night of coronation. That was also another well done coronation that had a good amount of time, good amount of build, good amount of characters in there. What's up, Matt? Got to catch you on the comments the other day too. Good for you, Maddie. I'm very, very proud of you. Okay, I'm gonna give you guys one kind of off the board, one that you guys definitely did not have on your radar, and I'm gonna say Lockdown 08 is one of those coronations. Angle versus Joe. Angle versus Joe. Angle versus Joe from Lockdown 08, in my opinion, is like the peak of TNA in terms of like the Dixie Carter era, the Panda Energy era, like the Spike TV era, before they had to bounce around networks and then eventually were under new ownership and all of that. To me, this was just like a perfectly built match in the way that they did it. Like I put on there the best shoot style ever in America. Might be the best shoot style build that's ever really happened in like a mainstream American promotion. I'm sure if there's another one, you guys can point it out, but they built this with wrestling storylines. Obviously, it was not like, it's not like people were confused, like, and they were confused about what they were getting. It's like, oh, is this an MMA fight? But no, they built it as sort of an MMA fight with the angles worked in, with Frank Trigg getting involved, with everyone that was involved in Angle's team. I want to say was Karen already a part of it at that point? I want to say she was, or was she? Excuse me, was she still with Kurt? That wouldn't make as much sense. But Angle was the ultimate like champ who had won all the belts at one time. He had the 5 belts at one. He was the WWE guy that was, winning everything. And Joe was it was like one of the 3 people's choices, right? Between Joe, AJ, and Christopher Daniels. And it felt like Joe was that baby face that was just right on the cusp. Like Joe, to me, I was always in that era, I was waiting for like Joe to show up on Raw every week and just beat up Cena. I was like Samoa Joe versus John Cena felt like in that time period, it could have been one of the biggest, coolest matches ever. And I will argue again that it's the best build that TNA has ever done. So I like what you put in the chat though there, Fernando. You noted Brock versus Rock at SummerSlam. Similarly, built around more of their athletic backgrounds than anything else. There wasn't a long coronation. That's more of a shorter coronation, but can you imagine if they don't put Brock over in that match, or if they give Rock way too much? Like the way I know, like they probably weren't happy about Rock getting booed in that match, but the way it turned out ended up, I think, the best possible scenario you could have, and then to have him feud with the Undertaker right after that. Joe versus Angle, it was a great build. It was a great match, a really, really cool coronation, and one of the few times that like one of these guys was breaking through. I think you can argue one of the problems that TNA had for years and years and years is they didn't have no coronations or culminations. It was all the same old guys just winning the stuff all the time, or when someone would win, similar to like a Starrcade 97 finish, it was convoluted as hell. There was all these things, and maybe the guys wouldn't hold the titles for very long. So I think if there are lessons to be learned here, and it's the same lesson I think could be learned from that Brock Rock at SummerSlam, is that these sports style builds, they're not always relevant. Like, I don't know how much of a real sports style build you could give to Hangman and Moxley. This is a brutal feud about determining who's best and, for the ultimate soul of the company. But these sports style builds, they can work if they're done right, not done to extreme boredom, and not done to patronize wrestling fans as if they're watching something differently. Now, this was a nice case of them capitalizing on being on the same network with the Ultimate Fighter and having the 6-sided ring in steel kind of mimic what an octagon would look like. So I think that really added really well to the aesthetics. But the other lesson to be learned here is great build, great matches, and great finishes can just be undone by regular generic bad television and the follow through. Like, remember, this ended up with like the main event Mafia as like the big storyline by the time we got through the summer and onto it. Like, that's where we ended up in, like, recruiting Joe to the main event Mafia. And as soon as like this, like the next month, he's in a triple threat with Scott Steiner. Once this started to wear off, it's like Joe was never the champion, and he goes on this weird thing where he paints his face. It's just terrible. Someone did mention that one. They mentioned Hogan in '83. Hogan versus Sheik is a huge one. And obviously like a history changing one, which I think probably the follow-up to that, I would say WrestleMania 6. Then from there, you could say Savage at WrestleMania 4. So, yeah, that was a mess at the end of 02, Derek. It's part of why I didn't include Brock versus Angle as like a big coronation. Brock versus Rock would have made more sense to include on that, although that was a very, very short build and short focus into that one. I do want to know, I don't have it on here, but you can argue a lot about the Roman Reigns coronations, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned from those. So like, I was in the building at WrestleMania 32 when no one in that building, except for my very little son that was with me, wanted to see Roman Reigns win that match and have his coronation. I think you can only have so many coronations, and that was one of the problems that Roman had. It was like, well, wasn't his coronation supposed to be the year before? But then they kind of pulled the rug out from under that, which is another thing I'll argue in one of those kind of, even though like it worked out kind of cool with the cash in and people not wanting to see Roman and all that, I think they would have saved themselves a ton of headwind if they just put the freaking belt on Roman that night. Unpopular opinion, but I think they should have just freaking done it. It all worked out in the end. They should have done it. WrestleMania 39, we talked about that earlier. They played with fire with that. if Cody gets hurt, good God, that would have been terrible. If Cody had somehow got hurt or The Rock would have got his way, how bad would that have looked in retrospect? Flair at the Rumble is a pretty good one because that's a coronation both in the build to the match and throughout the course of the match. There's a real coronation in the great 92 Rumble. I wish like Solid Monster and those guys hadn't stole that as like their gimmick of they're always going to refer to that. Like I'm stuck with like Money in the Bank 11 and One Night Stand 06, which shout out to Punk. Shout out to RVD, of course. Thank you, sir, for allowing us on the Twitter chat. And also, who else was I shouting out? Oh, John Cena. Yeah, John Cena has like everyone, if you ask them on their career where their coronation was, it's like their match against Cena. Derek asks if Hogan had won the AEW title from Bockwinkel in 83. Curious how that would have shaped him coming into WWF. Yeah, I wonder if they would have framed him as a champion the way they talking about our other conversation, the way they did with Flair, right? Would they have acknowledged him as kind of a world champion in the same kind of way? I love when we could just go back to 80s to like 80s stuff and 90s stuff like this and get into it. And because that stuff is still, I think it's still interesting and the way all that happened. So the last one I want to talk about, and we're going to hit our post in just about the right amount of time to get you guys to Fozzy. Well, two more. I forgot about one. Those are the Roman ones. But in the bottom left-hand corner, same night, I think they botched a real coronation opportunity with Sasha Banks in Dallas in 2016. They really did. That night, everything, all the trimmings were set up for Sasha to win. This was before we got used to the fact that Charlotte was just going to win all the big matches and all the big pay-per-views. So this is early on in that. It's the debut of the new title, all of this, and it just feels like Sasha's night. Becky's very much a background character, and the match was good. It was the best match of the card, but it was just sort of a botched one of these. Kaz beating Shane Douglas, guilty as charged. Good one. ECW had some good ones. ECW was good at like whenever they were the way Paul always had to make a new star, and whenever the things they did to win the belt, I thought were always pretty good. And the final one, WrestleMania 35, the history-making match with Becky, Charlotte, and Ronda. Oh boy, when I think of failed coronations in the more recent era, I think this was the one. There wasn't necessarily a fail. It just sucked. I mean, first of all, we all know the story here, so I don't have to recap it a ton, but this match forever should have been Ronda versus Becky. There was absolutely no reason to shoehorn Charlotte into this thing. It didn't add anything to the match, didn't even add any prestige to the match. They sent all three ladies around everywhere they did their press tours, and it was really Ronda Rousey was the star anyway. But there was no reason to make this a triple threat. With that said, they put it into the main event. They marketed the hell. They were so proud of themselves for making this the main event. They would tell you. You had like some, I won't mention any names, but you had some like people who do this kind of thing. Podcasters, writers. Oh, I'm so happy to be in attendance at the first ever women's main event. And then like they were there till like 3 a.m. and the transit was messed up. I'm really glad I didn't go to that WrestleMania. I'm usually glad I don't go to WrestleManias unless like, something's epic. But like if you don't go to one, you feel like, oh, it's cool. I'm on the couch. I'm much heavier in the wallet. But I was really glad I wasn't at this because of not only the transit issue, but the finish and how all this went down. So you have this build that it's simultaneously like the Becky build is simultaneously one of the coolest things that like ever happened in wrestling. I've said it before and I'll say it again. We spent years and years looking for the next Steve Austin, trying to make Randy Orton the next Steve Austin, trying to give these Austin type of things and affects to Cena and some of these other guys. No, the next Steve Austin was the Irish woman from NXT. That's who that was in almost every conceivable way. And as Maria is saying, this is one of the reasons the fans really started to hate Charlotte. They were already there, but this put him on another level. It's like Becky beating up these people is what got all these people over. To say that that she was needed in the match, or she needed to carry heel heat, especially after they turned Ronda Rousey heel and the fans were just ready to pounce on her. You didn't need any additional heat from Charlotte. Now that go home segment was awesome. We should never forget when Charlotte kicked Ronda's head in that car window and everything that happened with that go home segment where they just beat the crap out of each other. That was cool. That was awesome. And then we get to the match. Now, to this point, this was Ronda Rousey 1.0. If you recall, although she had been protected a lot in her matches, she had her matches were generally well received. Smoke and mirrors that they may be, who cares if they're executed well? They were executed well. This match, though, triple threat, I think added some other elements to it. They had to be super tired. It was like 9 hours into the show at this point. The poor little girls that are there to see Becky Lynch and Ronda, and their poor little kids are exhausted at 2 a.m. or whatever. As Brock's already back home in Minnesota after his match with Seth. The match wasn't great, but so what? It's a triple threat at WrestleMania. They're not always great. You'll live with it. And then there's the infamous finish where you have Becky kind of pinning Ronda's shoulders to the ground, but it looked like a botch finish, or it looked like, I don't know. You can go back. You go back on Peacock. I've never rewatched this match. I've watched this finish a few times. I did rewind that, but I've never actually gone back and rewatched and sat down to see if maybe this was better than I thought, or if it was pulled off. But the thing was here is it was supposed to be Becky's big coronation, and all you could talk about was what happened with that finish, and not in a good ooh, I got to tune in to see that. Again, it seemed like a botched finish. It seemed like someone just went into the wrong direction, or they were trying to protect Ronda, which was a really dumb move. First of all, let's face it. This was supposed to end with Ronda tapping out to disarm her. That's how you would have done a coronation in this case. Maybe Ronda didn't want to tap out. Maybe it was one of those kind of things. But you could at least, keep her shoulders to the freaking mat as you're coronating your new star at the beginning of this new era. Just absolutely awful stuff. So I think some of the lessons learned here is do not shoehorn anyone into these matches that doesn't need to be there, whether it's from an interference spot or it's from an actual layout of the match. I don't know who would be a shoehorned guy this weekend. We got about 7 minutes on here, so that's something maybe you guys can throw in the chat. Who would be a real shoehorned person to get involved in the Avenger Endgame finish? Who would be distracting? I don't know if there's a person like that would fit that. I'll let you guys decide. And the other thing is, and it goes back to one of the ones we talked about all the way with Starrcade 97, is don't leave any ambiguity into the finish when you're going to put over one of your pillars, one of your cornerstones. That's the one I was thinking of, Fernando. Just go with it. Put them over. Put them over strong. You want them to be your champion. Book a freaking finish. Scares me a little bit with Tony. Sometimes Tony can get a little too cute. So it does scare me a little bit. He needs to go against some of those impulses, I would think, in order for them to work out. Fernando brought up Darby. That's the one I'm thinking of, maybe a bit of a distraction or a shark jump, just because it seemed like that might have been his place to be. It'll be interesting if Jack Perry, Darby, or if Darby returns. Do you guys have Danielson playing into the finish? That's been kind of where I'm leaning. That Danielson would be the X factor and wouldn't be too distracting. Would be an endorsement. Would be a continuation of that storyline or closing that storyline, wherever it went. And then Moxie's got to get lost, right? For a while, he's either got to legit retire. I think that'd be awesome actually. If I don't know how he's doing financially. Every time the guy's got to stop working, but the storyline perspective, if you could just have Hangman come out there and retire Moxley in this Death Rider run, holy hell, that would be good. Probably not going to happen. That would be freaking amazing. But either way, he's got to go away. You need relief and you need a run. Because going back to that last one, the other thing that happened, the other thing that taints that WrestleMania 35 main event has nothing to do with anything that happened the night of WrestleMania 35. I think you also have to look at the follow-up. We came out of that night with Becky 2 belts, which led to her feuding with Charlotte again, Lacey Evans and Baron Corbin. WrestleMania 35 was supposed to be night of coronation. Seth Rollins, Kofi Kingston, Becky Lynch. 2 of those individuals had to feud with Baron Corbin and Lacey Evans for like the next couple of months. Just terrible. Derek says it would be at least a threat if Danielson returned to kick Mox in the head and leads to speculation about Danielson wrestling. Do you think, Derek, that would be a little too much of a distraction? I mean, I think it'd be a good talking point. Would it take away from Hangman's moment? I'm actually curious what any of you guys would think of that, because it is a big thing, and it's a topic on people's mind. You know, is he going to wrestle again? And when you've seen him make the appearance at the Mexico show or these things, when you see some physicality, what's going to happen? I mean, is he also training with Nikki Sawa? Is that happening? I don't know. Right, guys. Derek, hopefully get that comment in, but we are right at the end. We got through all of them very quickly. There's more that I wanted to include. This was a very incomplete history of Coronation, but hopefully it sort of reminded you how these things work and when we get there, what the follow through can be. I'm going to say, obviously, I don't think Tony is Eric Bischoff. Tony will very much like me saying that he's not Eric Bischoff, and I think he's going to nail this finish. The key will be, Tony, what do you do next Wednesday when we're talking again? So Derek closes out on the comments here, saying on his comment on Danielson interfering, he think it would add some finality to the story, but to their story, don't think Danielson is returning full time. Maria says Becky got pregnant in the middle of her run, was not good for her story. Not blaming her, just saying. Yeah, but that was a year in though too, right? She did go all the way through WrestleMania to next year, which I always wondered how that was going to turn out. I always thought that was going to be like her WrestleMania to just beat Shayna. I never thought Shayna was taking the belt from her even before the lockdown happened and she driving around the Performance Center in a semi. What a time. Notice no one ever does like a COVID retrospective. We're at like a 5-year mark. I've seen some like NBA bubble retrospectives. Ain't no one doing an empty arena WWE retrospective. No one wants to go back and have to watch that. Although for some Patreons, a super chat, maybe you can convince me. Poor E, just furious about Sean's booking, about the family. I feel for you, E. So I'm going to encourage you guys then on Saturday to go check out Ashley's watch along. Get in on the conversation. I'll try to pop in there, maybe have a comment or two for you guys. We'll be doing any post shows this weekend, but definitely will be on here next Wednesday to just recap all the wrestling, all the pinfalls, all the botches, all the politics. We're gonna talk about all of that. Derek's getting one last prediction out there. He actually thinks Ospreay and Swerve will lose to the Bucks and can't compete for the title for Europe. Ospreay will win the Owen and win the title All In London. Yeah, that does seem to be like that perfect sort of next coronation storyline right there. And I think him winning it in the UK was a good enough reason to put off his coronation till next year, if that's the direction you're going to go in. The direction this YouTube channel is going to go in, though, it's going to go in the direction of Fonzie. So now you can start hearing opinions from people who have drawn some freaking money, taken some freaking bumps. I will talk to all of you guys next Wednesday. Good show, guys. See you next week.